So we're going to be talking about Unit 6 today. Unit 6 is actually one of these shorter units because it covers a really short amount of time, the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age gets its name from a Mark Twain book, but it's a really good explanation of the era itself. On the outside, appears to be wealthier than it's ever been. But if you scratch below the surface, just like a gilded object is painted gold, but not really gold, if you scratch below, you start to reveal the cheap, undesirable stuff that's underneath. And America is very like that during this period. In the late 1800s, America is going through its second wave of industrialization. So we suddenly have an industrial America that has all sorts of new technologies. Brand new things are being invented every day. We have the rise of groups of people and corporations, men who become fabulously wealthy. People like Cornelius Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, or even Carnegie. These men are going to build massive corporations, which invent new things, take control of other things. We are going to see two new forms of corporate organization during this period, and you should know the difference between the two of these for the exam. Vertical integration is where a company owns each step in the process of creating something. So, for instance, if you owned a meat packing industry, you would own the cattle, you would own the branches that are raising those cattle, you would own the slaughterhouse where the cattle are processed into meat, you would own the railroads and the warehouses where the meat is moved and stored. You would own the packaging plant. You would own the delivery vehicles. You would own everything to maximize your profits. The other half of this is known as horizontal integration. And this is what we would call more today a monopoly. So, this is where you buy up all of your competitors in a market so that you own everything. So, it is very important to know the difference between the two of those. Those are the two ways in which corporations built themselves during this period. Now, this is going to be a period of unparalleled wealth for many Americans. There is a large middle class, and this middle class suddenly has access to all sorts of new time saving goods and materials. Suddenly, we have groceries appearing where you can buy food, so you're no longer having to raise your own food. You have a regular supply of prepackaged foods coming to you. Pre made clothing becomes cheap, and so all of a sudden, middle class women can afford to dress in the latest fashions because they can go to a store and buy this ready made clothing straight off the rack, just as we would today. Prior to this, if you wanted new clothing, you had to have that made specifically for you, or you had to make it yourself. Fabric could be quite expensive. But all of a sudden, we have a middle class that can afford to be fashionable, that can afford to wear the latest things that they're seeing. We have a middle class that can afford all sorts of commodities. Houses become very cluttered in the late 1800s. If you visit museums set up out in that area, you'll see their little knickknacks and things literally everywhere, with a bold printed wallpapers on the wall, very bold fabrics. And this is because during this time period, we get first gas lighting and then electric lighting, which means that homes are suddenly more brightly lit than they have been with just candles or oil lamps. And so once people can see their homes, they're like, huh, everything in here is very plain and hideous. It would be nice if, like, we had some bright colors on the walls, maybe some nice knickknacks in here now that we can actually see everything that's in our house. We're going to have heating systems coming into homes, make heating more dependable, gas stoves and ovens. The first dishwashers and washing machines for clothing are introduced during this period. The first vacuum cleaners are introduced during this period. So many of the technologies we use around our home today first begin appearing during this time period. And so if you're middle class, many of these items are affordable. They are making your life easier and more fun, which means middle class people suddenly have more time on their hands. They are able to do things like take vacations, which become a thing during this point, going out into the wilderness. This is going to be an era where we begin to think about conservation of natural wonders so that people can go out and visit these areas and these places. So if you're middle class, This is actually a good time to be alive. And if you're rich, like the Vanderbilts or the Rockefellers, then definitely it's a good time to be alive. But I said that all of this is a bit of an illusion. It's like a gilded box. It looks good and pretty on the outside. It looks like an expensive thing. It looks like everything is prosperous. But if you scrape a little bit below the surface, it's not really like that. And so, for the vast majority of Americans, they don't live, they definitely don't live the lifestyle of the Vanderbilts, but they're not even really living the lifestyle of the middle class. This is a point where the gap between the rich and the poor gets to be as wide as it will ever get in the US. The rich are fabulously rich, the poor are incredibly poor. And so, at the same time that we have this like booming middle class, we have people who are so incredibly poor that we have large amounts of children working in factories, young children. In fact, people documenting this, people like Lewis Hines, documented children as young as 2 and 3 working in textile factories with machines, with moving parts, working in meat processing plants, handling knives. That's toddlers that are working. Children become a very desirable part of the workforce during the Gilded Age, largely because they don't have to be paid as much as adults. And they have these like useful little hands that they can get inside the machines with without getting them caught. In fact, really small children can crawl inside the machines while they're still moving to work on them. I know, completely and utterly terrifying, uh, but quite normal. If a child becomes injured or killed, well, they're not leaving behind a family that they have to support like a mother or a father might. So, child labor explodes during this period. Not only are there children in the workforce, we have large numbers of women and immigrants who are going to be joining these children in factories, and these factories themselves aren't particularly safe. There is a wide range of industrial accidents. On a daily basis, people got injured by the machines. No one's checking to be sure that these machines are safe. Women would get their hair caught in them. Most commonly, fingers got caught inside of them. So it wasn't uncommon to see factory workers who are missing fingers. It's not uncommon to see factory workers who are missing legs or whole arms as a result of them getting caught in machines. And it was not uncommon for if a factory caught on fire for there to be high fatalities, such as during the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire in New York, where women were literally locked into the factory floor because of fears of theft. And when a fire broke out in the factory, the management fled the building instead of unlocking the doors to let the women out. Well over 100 women died in that particular accident. And there's no real laws on the books governing how these factories are run. There's nobody investigating to be sure that these places are safe. There's no codes in place to be sure that these places are safe places for people to be working. Nobody seems early on to really care that much that poor people, women, children, immigrants are being injured and killed in these places. America's also going to see an unparalleled number of immigrants entering this country. So it's another thing to really know about the Gilded Age is that the large number of immigrants entering this country, probably the largest numbers of immigrants that have ever entered this country. In fact, some statistics say today that as many as 70% of modern Americans can't trace their ancestry in the US back to before 1880. That's how many people arrived here in the 1800s. How weird it is to be like me and be able to trace your family back to the colonial era. I am the minority now. Now, the one thing you need to know about this rush of immigrants into the country is that this is a different group of immigrants that has been coming. We talked about immigration through the colonial era and up into the early 1800s. We were largely talking about German people, Irish people. Uh, but we start to see a shift occurring during the late 1800s. And we begin to see more people coming from Southern Europe. So there'll be lots of Italians, Greek people. We also start to see large numbers of people leaving Eastern Europe, particularly the Russian Empire. We're going to see large numbers of Russian Jews coming out of the Russian Empire. And we talked a little bit in class that some of the things that are driving this are the fact that there is kind of an economic depression occurring in Southern and Eastern Europe. And so America holds the prospect of jobs of an ability to support yourself and your family. And also, in the case of Eastern European, particularly Russian Jews during this point, Russia has begun a system of really pushing Jews out of Russia. The pogroms have begun. And the areas in which Russian Jews were forced to live were so appallingly bad that many of them were willing to risk crossing the borders illegally into places like Germany to get out and make their way to America, where at least they are not going to be persecuted because of their faith, allegedly. We can talk more about that in a different frame. So, this is a very different group of people that are coming to America, and they are coming by the thousands. And during this period, early on, America doesn't really have any strict immigration laws. In fact, America will have to build Ellis Island quickly to deal with this. And even then, its early amount of codes, if you remember in class we talked about it, was basically just we don't want to admit anyone that has any contagious diseases, and we don't want to admit anyone who's going to become a burden on society or any criminals. But if you were healthy and you were not mentally ill in any way and you didn't have a criminal record, you were in. Like, there was really no law codifying how many people could enter this country, what types of people we were going to let enter this country. And so we have thousands and thousands of immigrants pouring into America every single day during the 1880s and 1890s. We are also going to start to see that some of the products being produced by these factories aren't particularly safe. We talked about in class production of things like wallpaper that had arsenic in it, uh, substances, medicines that had potentially harmful things in them. We know today that cocaine is probably not something you should just casually be taking. Opiates had no control on them during this period. You could literally order morphine through the Sears and Roebuck catalog, no, without a doctor's prescription. These were not things that you had to eat that you had to have to get access to these items. We talked about the fact that the things people are eating are often adulterated meat that has rats ground up in it. I defer you guys back to those 2 pages of The Jungle that have scarred everyone forever. So Americans living in the Gilded Age begin to look around them and they see these problems. They see the fact that their cities are becoming overcrowded and dirty and dangerous, filled with disease. They see all of these thousands and thousands of people coming in who don't speak English and have weird customs and strange religions. And they see children and people being killed in factories. They see products that are dangerous, that are hurting them and their families. And so, what comes out of the Gilded Age is another era of reform, very similar to that earlier piece of reform that we talked about in the early 1800s. This one's going to be different, though, in that it's more scientifically based and less religious. And so, in our next video, we'll begin talking about the Progressive Era and what the Progressive Era did to address some of these problems we've been talking about within the Gilded Age.